Hey guys, tonight we begin with something that Hollywood has gotten spectacularly wrong for decades. When you think of medieval torture, you probably picture elaborate contraptions, dramatic confessions, and sadistic executioners cackling in candlelit chambers. The reality? Far more bureaucratic, surprisingly regulated, and infinitely more psychologically devastating than any movie could capture. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together, because we're about to explore one of humanity's darkest chapters, not for shock value, but to understand how legal systems, power structures, and human psychology intersected in ways that would shape justice for centuries. You're standing outside a stone fortress in 13th century France. The year is 1252, and Pope Innocent IV has just issued the papal bull Ad Extirpanda, officially authorizing the use of torture in ecclesiastical courts. This isn't some barbaric free-for-all. This is law. This is procedure. This is, in the minds of medieval authorities, justice. The heavy wooden door creaks open, and you're hit immediately by the smell. It's not what you expect. There's dampness, yes, and a metallic tang of iron. But mostly, it's the scent of unwashed bodies, stale bread, and something else. Fear. Fear has a smell, and after decades of use, it's soaked into the very stones of this place. Your footsteps echo as you descend the spiral staircase, each step taking you further from the world of sunlight and fresh air above. The walls are thick, sometimes 8 feet of solid stone, designed not just to keep prisoners in, but to keep their screams from reaching the outside world. This isn't cruelty for its own sake. It's a carefully constructed system of information extraction that medieval minds genuinely believed served the greater good. As you reach the bottom of the stairs, you notice something crucial that movies always get wrong. There's paperwork everywhere. Scrolls, quills, inkwells, and ledgers. Because here's the thing about medieval torture. It was obsessively documented. Every session required written authorization. Every technique had to be justified. Every confession needed to be recorded by a notary. The medieval mind was nothing if not bureaucratic, and torture was just another administrative procedure. The chamber itself is smaller than you'd imagine, maybe 20 feet by 15 feet, with a vaulted ceiling that disappears into shadows above. There are 3 or 4 devices visible: a wooden rack, a pulley system attached to the ceiling, what looks like a large wooden chair with straps, and in the corner, a brazier that's currently cold. No Iron Maidens, no elaborate mechanical contraptions, no theatrical setup. Just functional tools designed for a specific purpose, breaking down human resistance to questioning. You notice something else that contradicts popular imagination. There are windows. Small barred openings near the ceiling that let in just enough natural light to see by during the day. Torture sessions weren't conducted in pitch darkness by torchlight. They happened during normal business hours, with proper lighting, witnessed by multiple officials, and documented like any other legal proceeding. The person in charge isn't some hooded executioner with a sinister laugh. He's a middle-aged man in plain brown robes, likely a clerk or minor official, holding a scroll and checking items off a list. This is his job, the way accounting might be yours. He's not sadistic, he's professional. He arrives at work, performs his duties according to established procedures, and goes home to his family for dinner. This mundane reality is somehow more disturbing than any Hollywood villain. Because here's what they never tell you about medieval torture. It wasn't designed to cause maximum pain. It was designed to cause maximum psychological pressure with minimum permanent physical damage. The goal wasn't to punish. It was to extract confessions. And the medieval legal system had very specific ideas about how this should work. The legal framework of suffering You're sitting in on a meeting that would change the course of legal history forever. The year is 1215, and you're in a stone chamber in the Lateran Palace in Rome, watching as church officials debate something called ordeal by fire and ordeal by water. These ancient methods of determining guilt, making suspects hold red-hot iron or be thrown into ponds to see if they float, are about to be banned by the Fourth Lateran Council. What you're witnessing is a legal revolution that will have unintended consequences lasting centuries. When the Church withdraws its support for trial by ordeal, European legal systems suddenly face a crisis. How do you determine guilt without divine intervention? The answer they settle on will seem logical to medieval minds, but horrifying to modern ones. If God won't reveal the truth through miracles, then you'll have to extract it through interrogation. The legal scholar sitting across from you is explaining something called the Roman canonical procedure, and his logic is chillingly rational. If someone is accused of a serious crime, he says, adjusting his spectacles, but there aren't two eyewitnesses, which there rarely are, then you have three options. Let them go free, execute them based on suspicion alone, or find a way to make them tell the truth. To the medieval mind, torture isn't cruelty. It's mercy. It's the middle path between letting criminals escape justice and executing the possibly innocent. It's a regulated, supervised method of truth-seeking that theoretically protects both society and the accused. The irony is suffocating. You're handed a document, one of thousands that still survive in European archives today. It's a torture warrant, written in careful Latin script, signed by multiple officials and stamped with an official seal. It reads like a medical prescription. The accused may be subjected to the question of water, not to exceed 1 session in the presence of a physician, with the physician having authority to halt proceedings if the subject's life appears threatened. This isn't random violence, it's bureaucratized suffering. Every aspect is regulated. Who can order torture? Only certain judges. Against whom it can be used. Not children under 14, not pregnant women, not the elderly or infirm. What methods are permitted? Usually water, rope, or pressure techniques. How long sessions can last? Typically no more than an hour. And who must be present? At least 3 officials, including a notary and often a physician. The most disturbing part? These regulations were considered progressive for their time. They represented an attempt to make the legal system more humane, more rational, more just. The medieval mind genuinely believed that regulated torture was preferable to the arbitrary violence of earlier eras. You watch as clerks debate the finer points of legal procedure with the same detached professionalism that modern lawyers might discuss filing deadlines. The accused must be warned 3 times before the application of torture, one notes, making a mark on his parchment. And if they confess under torture, the confession must be repeated freely the following day, without coercion, or it cannot be used in court. This last detail is crucial and reveals the fundamental contradiction at the heart of medieval justice. Even the people designing these systems understood that confessions extracted under torture were unreliable. That's why they required the confession to be repeated freely afterward. But if they knew torture produced false confessions, why use it at all? The answer lies in medieval psychology and theology. They believed that while the flesh might lie under pressure, the soul could not. They thought torture stripped away deception and revealed spiritual truth. A person might falsely confess to escape pain, but if they repeated that confession freely the next day, it must be genuine repentance for genuine guilt. It's a logic that seems insane today, but made perfect sense within medieval Christian worldview. Torture wasn't just about extracting information. It was about forcing spiritual honesty, compelling the guilty to face their sins and confess them properly before God and man. As you leave this meeting, scrolls of new regulations tucked under arms of various officials, you realize you've witnessed the birth of a system that will define European justice for the next 5 centuries. These aren't barbarians reveling in cruelty. These are educated, well-meaning people trying to create a more just society. The fact that they're paving the road to hell with good intentions makes it infinitely more terrifying than simple sadism ever could. The machinery of truth. You're standing in what amounts to a medieval medical consultation, except the patient is chained to a wooden table, and the diagnosis being discussed is how much pain they can endure before their heart gives out. The year is 1374, and you're in Bologna, watching as a university-trained physician examines a suspected heretic before his scheduled interrogation. This is Dr. Matthias of Padua, and he's taking the man's pulse, checking his breathing, examining his fingernails and the whites of his eyes. He's not here out of compassion. He's here because the law requires it. Torture sessions must be supervised by a physician to ensure the subject survives long enough to provide useful information. It's quality control for human suffering. This man has a weak constitution, Dr. Matthias announces to the assembled officials, making notes on a piece of parchment. I recommend no more than 15 minutes on the Strappado, and absolutely no water torture. His lungs appear compromised from years of working in dusty conditions. The Strappado, you'll become intimately familiar with this device over the next hour. It's deceptively simple. A rope and pulley system attached to the ceiling. The subject's hands are tied behind their back, and they're hoisted up by their wrists until their feet barely touch the floor. Sometimes weights are added to their feet. Sometimes they're dropped suddenly, dislocating shoulders and tearing muscles. But here's what Hollywood never shows you. Before any of this happens, there's a conversation. A long, detailed, almost therapeutic conversation. The interrogator, a man named Brother Francesco, sits down across from the accused. A baker named Pietro, who's been reported for questioning church doctrine, and begins what can only be described as medieval psychological warfare. Pietro, Brother Francesco says, his voice gentle and concerned. You understand why you're here. Your neighbors have expressed concern about certain things you said about the sacrament of communion. Now, I know you're a good Christian man, a hard worker, a loving father. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help you save your soul. This goes on for nearly an hour. Brother Francesco doesn't threaten torture. He doesn't even mention it. Instead, he talks about Pietro's family, his business, his standing in the community. He speaks of God's mercy and the importance of honesty. He's not trying to intimidate Pietro into confessing. He's trying to make Pietro want to confess. You see those instruments over there? Brother Francesco finally asks, gesturing toward the corner where the Strappado waits. I pray to God we never have to use them. But Pietro, if you're hiding something, if you're protecting someone, if you've been led astray by false teachings, now is the time to unburden yourself, before things become more difficult. The psychology is sophisticated and terrifying. The torture isn't presented as punishment. It's presented as an unfortunate medical procedure that might become necessary if Pietro doesn't cooperate. Like surgery, painful but sometimes required for the patient's own good. Pietro breaks before they touch him, not from fear of pain, but from the weight of guilt and the promise of forgiveness. He admits to questioning whether bread and wine truly become the body and blood of Christ during Mass. He names two friends who express similar doubts. He begs for mercy and promises to do penance. Brother Francesco smiles and makes the sign of the cross. God bless you, Pietro. Your honesty has saved your soul. The physician packs up his instruments, unused. The notary records Pietro's confession in careful script. Everyone goes home, satisfied that justice has been served. But you notice something that chills you. Pietro's confession was probably sincere, but it was also probably wrong. In his desperation to say what his interrogators wanted to hear, to escape the looming threat of physical suffering, he's likely exaggerated his doubts and implicated innocent friends. The system worked exactly as designed. It extracted a confession, but whether it extracted the truth is another matter entirely. This is the daily reality of medieval torture. Most sessions ended without any physical violence at all. The mere presence of the instruments, the authority of the officials, the weight of religious and legal pressure. These were often enough to break down human resistance. The actual torture was just the backup plan, the threat that made everything else work. As Pietro is led away to begin his penance, a series of public prayers and fasting, you realize you've witnessed something far more complex than simple brutality. This is a sophisticated system of psychological manipulation, backed by physical threat, wrapped in legal procedure, and justified by religious doctrine. It's torture, but it's also medicine, law, psychology, and theology all rolled into one terrifying package. The architecture of fear. You're examining the blueprints for what will become one of Europe's most notorious interrogation facilities. And the architect explaining them to you isn't some sinister mastermind. He's a middle-aged man named Master Johannes, who also designs churches and guild halls. The year is 1298, and you're looking at plans for the basement levels of the new Episcopal Palace in Carcassonne, complete with specially designed chambers for judicial questioning. The key, Master Johannes explains, pointing to his carefully drawn diagrams, is acoustic isolation without compromising air circulation. We need the subjects to hear each other. That's psychologically essential. But we cannot have their voices carried to the street level or the main palace chambers above. The design is ingeniously horrible. The main interrogation chamber sits at the center, surrounded by 3 smaller holding cells positioned so that occupants can hear, but not see, what's happening in the center room. The walls are precisely calculated thickness, thick enough to muffle screams from reaching the outside world, but thin enough to let sounds carry between the chambers below. Notice the slight downward slope of the floors, Master Johannes continues, running his finger along the blueprints. This serves 2 purposes. Drainage, obviously, but also psychological impact. When a subject is brought down that final corridor, the gradual descent into the earth creates a powerful symbolic effect. They're literally being taken down into the depths. The ceiling height is deliberate too, just high enough for the Strapato pulley system, but low enough to feel oppressive. The single window in each cell is positioned to let in light during morning hours only, meaning interrogations conducted in the afternoon take place in progressively deepening gloom. Even the door hinges are specially designed to create a particular creaking sound that can be heard throughout the complex. But it's the waiting areas that reveal the true sophistication of medieval psychological warfare. Each holding cell contains a stone bench positioned, so the occupant faces a small window that looks directly into the main interrogation chamber. Prisoners waiting their turn can see everything that happens to others, but the window is too small and positioned too high for them to communicate with the person being questioned. The bench placement is crucial. Master Johannes notes with professional pride. Sitting there hour after hour, watching, knowing your turn is coming, it breaks down resistance before the subject even enters the questioning chamber. Most confess within hours of arrival, before we've laid a hand on them. You're handed a secondary set of plans, the administrative wing. Because of course there's an administrative wing. This facility includes a records room, a clerk's office, a consultation chamber where physicians examine subjects before interrogation, and even a small chapel where subjects can confess their sins after their sessions. The medieval mind couldn't conceive of a legal proceeding without proper record-keeping and spiritual oversight. The most disturbing detail is the ventilation system. A series of carefully designed air shafts ensures fresh air circulation throughout the complex, not out of concern for prisoner comfort, but because the interrogators and officials had to work in these spaces day after day. Can't have the staff getting sick from bad air while they're extracting confessions from heretics. Master Johannes shows you something else the movies always get wrong. The interrogation chamber itself is well lit, clean, and almost clinical in its efficiency. There's a desk for the notary, comfortable chairs for the officials, proper lighting from oil lamps and wall sconces, and even a small fireplace to keep everyone warm during long winter sessions. The torture devices themselves are kept in a separate room, brought out only when needed. like surgical instruments. The key to effective questioning, Master Johans explains, is atmosphere control. The subject must feel the weight of official authority, the inescapability of their situation, and the futility of resistance. But they must also retain hope. Hope that cooperation will lead to mercy. Fear and hope in perfect balance. That's what opens mouths and hearts. The entrance to the complex is designed with equal care. Subjects are brought down a long, straight corridor lined with religious frescoes depicting scenes of judgment and salvation. The message is clear. This is a place where souls are weighed, where truth is separated from lies, where divine justice is administered by earthly authorities. At the end of your tour, Master Johans shows you his proudest innovation, a speaking tube system that connects all the chambers to a central listening post in the clerk's office. Every word spoken anywhere in the complex can be overheard and recorded. Subjects who think they're speaking privately to cellmates are actually providing additional evidence for their own prosecution. Privacy is the enemy of truth, Master Johans declares with satisfaction. In God's house of justice, all words are heard, all thoughts are known, all sins are revealed. As you climb back up to street level, leaving behind the carefully orchestrated architecture of fear, you realize you've seen something that transcends simple brutality. This is sophisticated psychological engineering, designed by intelligent people who genuinely believed they were serving God and justice. The fact that they applied such creativity and care to the business of breaking human spirits makes it infinitely more chilling than crude barbarity ever could. The water cure and the art of drowning. You're watching what medieval authorities called the question of water, and the technical precision involved would impress any modern medical professional. The year is 1452, and you're in the basement of the Chateau de Vincennes, just outside Paris, observing an interrogation technique that will survive, in various forms, well into the 20th century. The subject is a woman named Marie de Brabant, accused of practicing witchcraft after several children in her village fell ill following a bitter dispute with their parents. She's been strapped to a wooden table that's tilted at precisely 15 degrees, an angle calculated through decades of experience to maximize psychological impact while minimizing the risk of actual drowning. Master Bertrand, the interrogator, is explaining the procedure to you with the detached professionalism of a university lecturer. The key is volume and timing, he says, checking the collection of clay jugs arranged beside the table. Too much water too quickly, and the subject may actually drown before providing useful information. Too little, and the procedure lacks effectiveness. The technique itself is horrifyingly simple. A cloth is placed over the subject's face, and water is poured slowly over it, creating the sensation of drowning without actually filling the lungs with enough water to cause death. It's the body's panic response that does the work. The overwhelming terror of suffocation that breaks down psychological resistance. But watching the actual procedure reveals details that no historical text ever captures. Marie doesn't scream. She can't, with the cloth over her face. Instead, she makes horrible choking, gasping sounds that seem to echo from deep in her chest. Her body convulses against the restraints, not from pain but from the primal panic of a brain convinced it's about to die. Water has been used since the Romans. Master Bertrand continues conversationally, as if discussing the weather rather than presiding over psychological torture. But we've refined the technique considerably. Notice how I pause between applications. This allows the subject to speak, to breathe, to consider their options. It's the hope of relief that makes the method effective. The physician present, Dr. Guillaume de Reims, is monitoring Marie's pulse at her wrist, checking the color of her fingernails, watching for signs of genuine distress versus simulated resistance. His job is to ensure she experiences maximum terror without actually dying, a delicate medical balancing act that requires considerable expertise. The pulse rate should increase dramatically during application. Dr. Guillaume explains to you, but return to near normal levels during the rest periods. If it remains elevated, we pause longer. If it drops too low, we may need to discontinue the session entirely. What strikes you most is how quickly it works. After less than 10 minutes, perhaps 4 or 5 applications of the water-soaked cloth, Marie begins trying to speak. Master Bertrand immediately removes the cloth and leans close to hear her whispered words. "Please," she gasps, water streaming from her nose and mouth. "Please, I'll tell you anything. Just ... Please don't." This is the moment Master Bertrand has been waiting for. Not a confession, but the breakdown of resistance. The transition from defiance to desperation, from "I am innocent" to "I'll tell you anything." Once a subject reaches this psychological state, the actual interrogation can begin. "Marie," Master Bertrand says gently, almost kindly, "I don't want to hurt you. I want to help you save your soul. But you must be honest with me. Completely honest. Did you practice the dark arts? Did you make a compact with the devil to harm those children?" And here's where the technique reveals its true insidiousness. Marie, her judgment clouded by terror and her breathing still labored, begins confessing to things that almost certainly never happened. Yes, she met with the devil in the form of a black cat. Yes, she cast spells to make the children sick. Yes, she can name other women in the village who also practice witchcraft. The notary scribbles furiously, recording every word. Dr. Guillaume nods approvingly. The procedure has achieved its intended medical effect without causing permanent physical damage. Master Bertrand smiles with professional satisfaction. Another successful extraction of truth. But you can see what they cannot or will not acknowledge. Marie is saying whatever she thinks they want to hear, confessing to impossible things, implicating innocent neighbors, all in the desperate hope of avoiding another few minutes under that suffocating cloth. The water torture has produced a confession, but almost certainly not the truth. The session continues for another hour, with Marie providing increasingly elaborate details about her supposed supernatural activities. She describes Sabbath meetings that never happened, demonic rituals that exist only in the imaginations of her interrogators, and a network of witches that will lead to dozens of additional arrests in the coming weeks. As Marie is finally unstrapped from the table and led away to a cell where she'll await trial based on her confession, Master Bertrand turns to you with evident pride. "You see how merciful our methods have become? A century ago, we might have simply burned her based on suspicion alone. Now we give her the opportunity to confess her sins and seek God's forgiveness." The medieval mind genuinely saw this as progress. Regulated, supervised, medically monitored torture that extracted confessions while preserving life. The fact that these confessions were largely fictional was either ignored or rationalized away as the inevitable result of dealing with naturally deceptive criminals and heretics. Walking up from that basement chamber, you carry with you the sound of Marie's desperate gasps and the image of officials congratulating themselves on their humanitarian approach to justice. It's a combination that will haunt your dreams for years to come. The mathematics of pain. You're sitting in on what amounts to a medieval medical conference, except instead of discussing healing techniques, the assembled physicians and legal scholars are debating the precise application of suffering for judicial purposes. The year is 1487, and you're in the library of the University of Salamanca, watching as some of Europe's finest minds tackle the question: how much pain is legally and morally permissible in the pursuit of truth? Dr. Antonio de Medina, professor of canon law, is presenting his research on torture duration with charts and diagrams that would look at home in any modern academic setting. Based on my analysis of over 300 cases from the past decade, he explains, pointing to a hand-drawn graph, sessions lasting longer than 45 minutes show diminishing returns in terms of confession quality, while significantly increasing the risk of permanent physical damage or death. His colleague, Dr. Felipe Hernandez, a physician who has supervised dozens of interrogations, nods in agreement. The body has natural limits, he adds, consulting his own notes. After 30 minutes of sustained stress, subjects often lose coherent speech. They'll confess to anything, and I mean anything, just to make the procedure stop. This produces unreliable information. What you're witnessing is the birth of what might be called scientific torture, the application of empirical observation and medical knowledge to make human suffering more efficient and legally defensible. These aren't sadists reveling in cruelty. They're scholars trying to perfect a system they genuinely believe serves justice. The discussion turns to specific techniques, and Dr. Medina produces a leather-bound manual he's been compiling, Cuestiones de Tortura, Questions about Torture. It reads like a medical textbook, complete with anatomical diagrams showing optimal pressure points, charts indicating maximum safe weights for the Strapeto, and detailed descriptions of how to recognize when a subject is approaching physical limits. The key insight, Dr. Medina explains, is that psychological pressure often proves more effective than physical pain. A subject who believes they're about to die will confess more readily than one who is merely experiencing discomfort. This suggests we should focus on techniques that maximize fear while minimizing actual bodily harm. Dr. Hernandez demonstrates this principle using a wooden mannequin and rope. Consider the Strapeto, he says, tying the mannequin's wooden arms behind its back. The initial lifting produces sharp pain in the shoulders, effective for getting attention. But the real psychological impact comes from the subject's knowledge that they're completely helpless, suspended in midair, entirely dependent on their interrogator's mercy. The assembled scholars take notes with the same diligence they might apply to studying Aristotle or Aquinas. This is serious academic work, funded by the church and sanctioned by civil authorities. These men will return to their universities and teach these principles to the next generation of lawyers, judges, and government officials. But the most chilling part of the discussion focuses on what they call graduated application, the careful escalation of pressure designed to break psychological resistance at the lowest possible level of physical intervention. It's a systematic approach that reveals deep understanding of human psychology, centuries before psychology existed as a formal discipline. Begin with the threat, Dr. Medina outlines, then the display of instruments, then the preparation of the subject, then minimal application, gradually increasing until confession is achieved. Each step should be preceded by an opportunity for the subject to speak voluntarily. The goal is to find the minimum pressure necessary to produce maximum cooperation. Dr. Hernandez adds medical considerations. Monitor breathing, pulse, skin color, and speech patterns throughout. A subject approaching genuine physical crisis will show specific symptoms: rapid, shallow breathing, bluish fingernails, incoherent speech. At that point, we must stop immediately, not from mercy, but to preserve the subject's ability to provide useful testimony. They discuss case studies with clinical detachment. A merchant accused of heresy who confessed after merely being shown the torture chamber. A suspected witch who broke down during the preparation phase, before any physical pressure was applied. A group of supposed blasphemers who implicated each other after witnessing one member, subjected to rope torture for less than 10 minutes. These cases demonstrate the efficiency of psychological pressure, Dr. Medina concludes. Physical torture should be our last resort, not our first option. A confession extracted through fear alone is more likely to be genuine than one extracted through pain, because the subject retains clarity of thought and can provide detailed, coherent information. The logic is impeccable within its own twisted framework, and that's what makes it so terrifying. These aren't ignorant barbarians stumbling around in the dark. They're intelligent, educated people applying scientific method to the art of breaking human spirits. They're making torture more humane and more effective simultaneously. As the conference concludes, Dr. Medina announces plans to publish his manual for distribution to courts throughout Europe. Knowledge must be shared, he declares. If we are to serve justice, we must perfect our methods and train our practitioners properly. The days of crude, ineffective torture must end. We owe it to our subjects, to our authorities, and to God Himself to conduct these procedures with skill and precision. Walking out of that library, surrounded by men congratulating themselves on their humanitarian approach to judicial torture, you realize you've witnessed something far more disturbing than simple cruelty. You've seen intelligence and compassion applied to the systematic destruction of human dignity, and somehow that feels infinitely worse than mindless brutality ever could. The Confession Factory. You're standing in what amounts to a medieval assembly line for processing human souls, and the efficiency would impress any modern factory manager. The year 1534, and you're in the basement complex beneath the Palace of the Inquisition in Toledo, watching as a carefully orchestrated system processes dozens of suspected heretics with the same methodical precision that a mill processes grain. Brother Miguel de Santos, the chief interrogator, is giving you a tour that he clearly takes pride in. We can handle up to 12 cases simultaneously, he explains, gesturing toward a series of chambers branching off from a central corridor. Each interrogator specializes in specific types of cases: crypto-Jews in Chamber 1, suspected Lutherans in Chamber 2, practitioners of folk magic in Chamber 3, and so forth. The specialization is remarkable and disturbing. Each interrogator has developed expertise in particular types of religious deviation, studying the specific beliefs, practices, and psychological vulnerabilities of their assigned heretical groups. It's not random questioning. It's targeted psychological warfare based on decades of accumulated knowledge about how different minds break down under pressure. In Chamber 1, you observe Brother Fernando working on a case involving a converso, a Jewish convert to Christianity, suspected of secretly maintaining Jewish practices. Brother Fernando doesn't begin with threats or torture devices. Instead, he demonstrates intimate knowledge of Jewish law, Hebrew prayers, and traditional observances, using this information to create a web of psychological pressure that's far more effective than physical coercion. "Tell me about your Sabbath observances, Diego," Brother Fernando says conversationally, consulting a thick file of notes. "Your neighbor mentioned that you change your clothes on Friday evenings and that your wife lights candles at sunset. Innocent Christian practices, I'm sure, but I'd like to understand them better." Diego shifts uncomfortably. He knows that Brother Fernando knows exactly what Friday evening candle lighting means in Jewish tradition. The interrogator isn't asking for information. He's demonstrating that denial is pointless, that his knowledge of Jewish practices is too comprehensive for simple lies to succeed. My wife enjoys having a clean house for the weekend," Diego stammers. "The candles are just for ... for light." Brother Fernando smiles gently and opens another page in his file. "Of course. And I'm sure the special bread she bakes on Fridays, the one your baker described as braided in an unusual pattern, is just a family recipe? Nothing to do with challah preparation?" This continues for 2 hours. No threats, no violence, no torture devices. Just the systematic demonstration that Brother Fernando knows more about Diego's secret religious practices than Diego himself might realize. It's psychological torture of the highest order, and it's devastatingly effective. Meanwhile, in Chamber 2, Brother Antonio is using completely different techniques on a suspected Lutheran. Instead of demonstrating knowledge of Protestant theology, he's focusing on family relationships, community standing, and economic consequences. He knows that Lutheran converts tend to be motivated by intellectual conviction rather than ethnic tradition, so he applies different psychological pressures. "Your daughter Maria is about to marry the Hernandez boy," Brother Antonio notes, reading from his own thick file. "Fine family, good Catholic bloodline. But if certain ... questions about your beliefs become public knowledge, well, you understand how these things affect family alliances." The specialization extends to the physical techniques as well. Brother Miguel shows you a chart detailing which torture methods work best on which types of subjects. Educated heretics, he explains, tend to break faster under psychological pressure than physical pain. because they can intellectualize and thereby resist bodily suffering. Simple folk, conversely, often respond more quickly to physical discomfort because they lack the mental frameworks for sophisticated resistance. It's not cruelty, Brother Miguel insists as you observe these parallel interrogations. It's efficiency. Why subject a man to hours of physical suffering when 10 minutes of the right psychological pressure will achieve the same result? We're actually being more merciful by tailoring our methods to individual psychology. The record keeping is extensive and sophisticated. Each case file contains not just the accusations and evidence, but detailed psychological profiles of the subjects, their family relationships, economic situations, social connections, personality traits, and previous responses to questioning. It's a database of human vulnerability that allows interrogators to target their subjects' specific weaknesses with surgical precision. You watch as Brother Fernando finally breaks Diego's resistance, not through torture, but through the simple expedient of reading aloud from a letter Diego's own son wrote to the Inquisition, describing his father's suspicious religious practices in exchange for leniency in his own case. The betrayal breaks Diego more completely than any physical suffering could. You see? Brother Miguel says with satisfaction as Diego begins sobbing and confessing to decades of secret Jewish observance. Knowledge is power. Understanding human nature is more effective than understanding the mechanics of torture devices. Pain passes. Fear of social destruction, of family disgrace, of eternal damnation. These fears linger and grow. The factory analogy becomes more apparent as you observe the flow of cases through the system. Suspects enter through one door, undergo evaluation and classification, are assigned to appropriate specialists, undergo interrogation tailored to their specific type of heresy, confess their sins, and exit through another door to await sentencing. It's bureaucratic, efficient, and absolutely terrifying in its systematic thoroughness. Brother Miguel shows you the statistics with obvious pride. Confession rates above 90%. Average case processing time reduced from weeks to days, and minimal use of actual physical torture. Less than 15% of cases require anything beyond psychological pressure. From his perspective, it's a remarkable humanitarian achievement. We've learned that breaking the mind is more effective than breaking the body, he concludes as your tour ends. Fear of pain often proves more powerful than pain itself. Understanding this has allowed us to serve both justice and mercy more effectively than our predecessors ever imagined possible. As you leave this industrialized processing center for human souls, you carry with you the image of intelligent, dedicated men applying cutting-edge management techniques to the ancient art of extracting confessions. It's torture, but it's also psychology, sociology, and organizational efficiency, all wrapped together in one perfectly horrible package. The testimony of screams. You're witnessing something that will haunt legal historians for centuries. The systematic documentation of human suffering in the name of judicial procedure. The year is 1592, and you're in Prague, sitting beside Master Karol Svoboda, chief notary to the imperial court, as he records in precise detail every sound, word, and gesture during what's euphemistically called extraordinary questioning. The subject is a woman named Anna Zermakova, accused of practicing witchcraft after a series of unexplained deaths in her village. Master Karol's quill moves steadily across the parchment, creating a record that reads like a grotesque parody of a medical report. Subject secured to questioning device at the 9th hour. Initial application of pressure produces immediate vocal response. Subject maintains innocence despite obvious distress. What strikes you immediately is the clinical language used to describe human suffering. Anna's screams become vocal manifestations of guilt. Her desperate pleas for mercy are recorded as continued resistance to truthful confession, and her eventual breakdown is documented as spiritual opening leading to productive dialogue. The precision is remarkable and horrifying. Master Karol notes the exact time of each procedure, the specific techniques applied, the duration of each application, and the subject's responses with the same attention to detail that a modern court reporter might use. But these records aren't just legal documents. They're instructional manuals for future interrogators. Notice how I record not just what she says, but how she says it. Master Carol explains during a brief recess while Anna recovers enough consciousness to continue speaking. The pitch of her voice, the coherence of her words, the physical responses. All of this provides valuable information for determining the authenticity of any eventual confession. The interrogator, Brother Tomek, consults these notes like a physician reviewing patient charts. She's maintaining consistency in her denials, he observes, reading Master Carol's careful documentation. No contradictions yet, no obvious fabrications. We may need to increase pressure gradually rather than attempting shock techniques. This is torture as science, with detailed documentation serving as experimental data for refining future procedures. Master Carol's records don't just capture what happened, they analyze effectiveness. Note which techniques produced which responses, and provide recommendations for similar cases. The actual confession, when it finally comes after 3 hours of documented suffering, reveals the sophisticated psychology behind the entire system. Anna doesn't just admit to practicing witchcraft. She provides an elaborate narrative that includes all the details her interrogators have been trained to expect. Meetings with the devil, participation in Sabbath gatherings, the creation of maleficium, harmful magic, and the names of other supposed witches. Master Carol records every word of this confession. But what's most disturbing is how he also documents the process by which it was constructed. His notes reveal how Brother Tomek skillfully guided Anna's testimony, suggesting details when she hesitated, correcting inconsistencies in her story, and ensuring that her confession matched the theological and legal requirements for a valid witchcraft case. The subject initially claimed to have met the devil in the form of a wolf. Master Carol writes, but upon questioning revealed uncertainty about this detail. When pressed, subject agreed that the devil appeared as a black man with goat's feet, consistent with established theological descriptions. You're watching the creation of evidence, not just its extraction. Anna's confession isn't simply her own words under duress. It's a collaborative fiction created by interrogator and victim working together, with the victim providing the raw material of desperation and the interrogator shaping it into legally useful form. The documentation process itself becomes part of the torture. Master Carol reads portions of Anna's confession back to her during the session, asking her to confirm details, elaborate on specific points, and resolve apparent contradictions. The act of hearing her own words, distorted by pain and fear into admissions of impossible crimes, becomes another layer of psychological pressure. You see how the documentation serves multiple purposes, Master Carol explains as he reviews the day's work. First, it provides legal evidence for the court proceedings. Second, it creates a training resource for other interrogators. Third, it demonstrates the thoroughness and professionalism of our procedures to higher authorities. And fourth, it forces the subject to confront their own words, making denial increasingly difficult. The records reveal patterns that individual interrogators might miss. Master Carol shows you comparative files from similar cases, pointing out how certain types of subjects tend to confess to specific types of supernatural activities, how the progression from denial to confession typically follows predictable stages, and how effective different techniques prove with different demographics. Women accused of witchcraft typically confess to sexual congress with demons within the first 2 hours. He notes, consulting his statistical summaries, men accused of sorcery usually focus first on economic motivations, using magic to harm competitors or increase their own prosperity. Understanding these patterns allows us to guide confessions more efficiently. The most chilling aspect is how these detailed records were shared between courts, creating a standardized approach to torture that spread across Europe. Master Carol corresponds regularly with notaries in other cities, exchanging techniques, comparing results. and developing best practices for extracting confessions. As Anna is finally led away to await her trial based on her documented confession, Master Carral begins preparing a summary report that will be filed with imperial authorities and copied to other courts. Her suffering has become data, her broken spirit transformed into legal precedent, her desperate lies preserved as eternal testimony to crimes she never committed. Proper documentation serves justice, Master Carral concludes as he seals his report with wax. Without careful records, we would be no better than common torturers. With them, we are servants of law, agents of divine will, and guardians of social order. The triumph in his voice as he speaks these words is perhaps the most disturbing sound you've heard in this chamber of documented horrors. The breaking point. You're observing something that medieval authorities never intended anyone to witness. The precise moment when human consciousness fractures under pressure, when the careful architecture of personality collapses, and when a person stops being themselves and becomes something else entirely. The year is 1612, and you're in the basement of Würzburg's Episcopal Palace, watching the systematic destruction of a human mind in the name of spiritual salvation. The subject is Father Johann Junius, a respected priest accused of leading a witches' coven. He's been undergoing interrogation for 6 days now, and you can see the progressive deterioration in his eyes, his posture, his speech patterns. This isn't just physical exhaustion. This is the methodical dismantling of sanity itself. Dr. Heinrich Schulfeu, the interrogator, has perfected what he calls spiritual archaeology, the systematic excavation of a subject's psychological defenses, layer by layer. He doesn't rely primarily on physical torture, though the threat remains ever present. Instead, he uses something far more sophisticated, the complete destruction of the subject's understanding of reality itself. Truth, Dr. Schulfeu explains to you during one of Father Junius's brief rest periods, exists in layers. The surface layer is what the subject consciously believes about themselves. The deeper layers contain the spiritual realities they've hidden even from themselves. Our job is to dig through the lies and self-deception to reach the bedrock of genuine confession. The technique is horrifyingly elegant. Dr. Schulfeu has spent weeks studying Father Junius's life history, his theological writings, his personal relationships, his private fears and doubts. He uses this information not to threaten, but to create an alternative reality in which Father Junius's guilt is the only logical explanation for everything that has ever happened to him. Consider your sermon last Easter. Dr. Schulfeu says, consulting his notes, in which you spoke about the temptations that assail even righteous men. Were you speaking from theological knowledge, Johann, or from personal experience? Were you warning your flock about dangers you'd encountered yourself? Father Junius tries to explain that theological understanding doesn't require personal sin, but Dr. Schulfeu has an answer for everything. Every defense becomes evidence of guilt. Every denial becomes proof of deeper deception. Every appeal to innocence becomes demonstration of how thoroughly the devil has corrupted the priest's understanding of his own actions. The devil is cunning, Johann. He doesn't reveal himself to his servants as Satan. He comes as an angel of light, convincing good men that they're doing God's work, even as they serve the forces of darkness. How would you know if you'd been deceived? How would any of us know? This continues for hours. Dr. Schulfeu systematically reframes every aspect of Father Junius's life and ministry, creating a narrative in which the priest has been an unwitting servant of evil for decades. The interrogator doesn't need to prove these claims. He just needs to make them psychologically plausible to a mind weakened by fear, isolation, and spiritual confusion. You watch as Father Junius begins to doubt his own memories, his own motivations, his own understanding of right and wrong. The careful philosophical framework that has sustained his faith and identity begins to crumble under the weight of Dr. Schulfeu's relentless reinterpretation of reality.
I
I don't know, Father Junius whispers, and those 3 words represent the beginning of the end. Once a subject admits uncertainty about their own innocence, they've crossed a psychological threshold from which return becomes nearly impossible. Dr. Shelveyu recognizes this moment with the expertise of long practice. Of course you don't know, Johann. How could you? The devil's greatest victory is convincing his servants that they're serving God. But now, in this moment of clarity, you can begin to see the truth. You can begin to remember things as they really were, not as the enemy convinced you they were. The actual confession, when it comes, is less dramatic than literature would suggest. Father Junius doesn't scream or break down in tears. Instead, he begins speaking in a quiet, detached voice, describing supernatural experiences that never happened, demonic encounters that exist only in the theological imaginations of his interrogators, and a career of spiritual corruption that contradicts everything known about his actual ministry. But what's most disturbing is that Father Junius begins to believe his own confession. Dr. Shelveyu has so thoroughly reconstructed the priest's understanding of reality that the false memories feel more real than the actual ones. The interrogator hasn't just extracted a confession. He's created a new personality, a new set of memories, a new understanding of identity itself. You see, Dr. Shelveyu explains with professional satisfaction, physical torture breaks the body, but spiritual pressure breaks the soul. A confession extracted through pain may be false, spoken only to escape suffering, but a confession that emerges from genuine spiritual conviction, from the subject's own recognition of their hidden guilt, that represents true repentance and authentic spiritual healing. Father Junius continues confessing for another 2 hours, providing names of other supposed witches, describing Sabbath meetings that never occurred, and detailing supernatural activities that would have been impossible even if he had wanted to perform them. But in his altered state of consciousness, these confessions feel like genuine memories of actual events. The final stage is perhaps the most chilling. Father Junius thanks Dr. Shelveyu for helping him recognize his own spiritual corruption. He expresses gratitude for the interrogation process, praising it as a necessary spiritual medicine that has saved his soul from eternal damnation. The victim has become a collaborator in his own destruction. As Father Junius is led away to await execution based on his confession, Dr. Shelveyu turns to you with evident pride. "This is the future of judicial questioning," he declares. "Why break bodies when you can heal souls? Why extract false confessions through pain when you can inspire genuine repentance through spiritual insight?" The horror is that he genuinely believes this. In his mind, he hasn't destroyed Father Junius. He saved him, revealing hidden spiritual truths and enabling authentic confession before God. The fact that these truths are fabrications and the salvation is actually damnation never occurs to him. The aftermath of truth. You're standing in a place that shouldn't exist. A secret archive beneath the Chateau de Vincennes, where retired interrogators have gathered to write their memoirs. And what you discover there will challenge everything you thought you understood about medieval torture. The year is 1634, and you're reading documents that were never meant to be seen by anyone outside this small circle of aging men who spent their careers extracting confessions in the name of God and King. Master Philippe de Montclair, former chief interrogator for the Parliament of Paris, is nearing the end of his life and has been writing what he calls his spiritual testament, a brutally honest assessment of 40 years spent in the business of breaking human spirits. His handwriting is shaky now, but his words are devastatingly clear. "I have extracted over 3,000 confessions," he writes, "and I believe perhaps a dozen were genuinely true. The others were simply what desperate people thought we wanted to hear, spoken by minds shattered beyond the capacity for accurate memory or rational thought. I served the law faithfully, but I do not believe I served justice. This is not what you expected to find. These aren't boastful memoirs celebrating successful careers. They're documents of profound spiritual crisis. written by men who have begun to understand the true nature of what they spent their lives doing. Brother Antoine de Clermont, former inquisitor for the Diocese of Toulouse, has compiled statistical analyses that would shame any modern social scientist. His careful records show that confession rates vary dramatically based not on actual guilt, but on the interrogator's skill, the subject's social class, the political climate of the time, and even the weather conditions during questioning. Confessions increased by 30% during winter months. Brother Antoine notes with bitter precision, not because heresy was more common in cold weather, but because subjects weakened by hunger and cold broke down more quickly under pressure. We were not discovering truth. We were manufacturing it according to seasonal variations in human resilience. Even more damning are his studies of post-execution evidence. In cases where he was able to investigate after subjects had been executed based on their confessions, Brother Antoine that the vast majority of the supposed crimes had never actually occurred. The covens hadn't existed. The Sabbat meetings were fictional. The supernatural activities were impossible. Marie de Fontaine confessed to killing infants through witchcraft. He writes, "After her execution, I learned that the baby she allegedly murdered had actually died of a plague that struck 3 other villages the same month." Jean Le Ballinger confessed to summoning demons to destroy his neighbor's crops. The crop failure was caused by an unusually wet spring that affected farms throughout the region. We executed people for crimes that had natural explanations. Master Henry de Bourbon, former royal interrogator, has focused his memoirs on what he calls the corruption of compassion. He describes how the system gradually transformed decent men into skilled manipulators of human suffering, and how the institutional framework made it impossible to recognize what was really happening. We told ourselves we were being merciful, Master Henry writes, because we used psychology rather than crude violence, because we required medical supervision, because we gave subjects multiple opportunities to confess voluntarily. But mercy that serves only to make cruelty more efficient is not mercy at all. It is simply more sophisticated evil. The most disturbing revelation comes from Dr. Nicolas de Reims, a physician who supervised hundreds of torture sessions and kept detailed medical records. His analysis reveals that the psychological techniques developed by medieval interrogators were far more damaging than simple physical torture would have been. Bodies heal, Dr. Nicholas observes. Broken bones mend, wounds close, bruises fade. But minds shattered by systematic psychological manipulation rarely recover. I have encountered former subjects years later, people who confessed under pressure and were eventually released and found them permanently changed. They no longer trust their own memories, their own perceptions, their own moral judgment. We didn't just extract confessions. We destroyed the human capacity for spiritual certainty. These men are writing in secret because they know their revelations would undermine the entire legal system they served. They can't publish their insights, can't reform the institutions they worked for, can't even discuss their conclusions with colleagues still active in the field. All they can do is document the truth for posterity and hope that someday someone will learn from their terrible wisdom. Master Philippe has written what amounts to a training manual for recognizing false confessions. All the psychological and behavioral indicators that suggest a subject is saying what they think interrogators want to hear rather than reporting actual memories. But this manual will never be used because the system depends on accepting all confessions as equally valid. The perfect confession, Master Philippe writes with bitter irony, contains exactly the details that theological and legal authorities expect to hear, follows the narrative patterns established by previous cases, and implicates precisely the number of additional suspects needed to justify continued investigation. Perfect confessions are also, by definition, almost certainly false. Brother Antoine has calculated that if even half the witchcraft confessions he extracted over his career had been genuine, the supernatural activities described would have required a level of demonic involvement that should have been visible to the entire population. The mathematical impossibility of the confessions he faithfully recorded has become, in his old age, proof of their fabricated nature. We created an entire mythology of evil, he concludes, and then tortured people until they agreed to inhabit that mythology as fictional characters in someone else's nightmare. As you finish reading these secret documents, you realize you've discovered something unprecedented in medieval history. A group of professional torturers who have gained the courage to confront the truth about their own work. Their testimonies provide a window into the systematic self-deception that made medieval torture psychologically possible for its practitioners. But perhaps the most chilling aspect is that these insights died with these men. The institutional momentum of the legal system was too powerful to be changed by individual moral awakening. The torture continued for another century, justified by the same theological and legal arguments, producing the same false confessions, destroying the same innocent lives. The secret archive you've discovered represents one of history's most tragic, might have beens, a moment when systematic torture could have been abandoned based on empirical evidence of its ineffectiveness, but wasn't, because the truth was too threatening to the power structures that depended on manufactured guilt and fabricated confessions.